They knew exactly what they were doing. And you only have to look down the list of the 7 to see that they're kind of the usual suspects, right? They're the Corbynists who no doubt Starmer, well, you could say perhaps he was looking for an excuse to withdraw the whip from them. But I do think there's a kind of fine line between ruthless and reckless. We saw this sort of ruthless side of him during the campaign as well, didn't we? When he was sort of purging half the hard left candidates then as well. And obviously Diane Abbott was the one that sort of came back to bite him and caused him a lot of negative headlines. But his kind of intention to deal with these rebels has sort of been clear for the last few weeks. But I do think you're right. The issue on which he's done it is quite a tricky one. And, he did indicate on earlier this week on Monday, I think, that he might actually be up for scrapping this cap. But the fact that he's now done this, I don't know, one wonders whether it makes the path back to doing that even harder.
Let's start with the Labour Party. Only one word to describe Keir Starmer kicking out 7 MPs from his parliamentary party, a purge. He's taken the opportunity of the rebellion over benefits for larger families to push people like John McDonnell and Rebecca Long-Bailey out of the party, at least for 6 months. Mish Rahman is a member of Labour's National Executive Committee. He told us why this has become a dividing issue within the party.
I was there when the manifesto was agreed, and this was raised then as well. But Labour didn't keep the 2-child cap in their manifesto. They made a commitment to lift children from poverty and review the benefits of it. Now, these 7 obviously don't think that a year more or whatever, however long the task force is going to take of children going hungry is okay. And you will hear from supposed self-claimed moderates who think that this is just a gesture, this is performative, it won't make fundamental changes. This is about feeding poor kids. There's 300,000 of them who will be immediately alleviated above the breadline if this cap is removed.
The sense we've got is that the Labour Party would quite like to do this, but they can't afford to. So what about Keir Starmer's actions? Is it strong, ruthless, petty? Charles, which adjective would you use?
Baffling, because I've never been absolutely certain what withdrawing the whip means or how bad it really is. I mean, what it just means, they get to sit there on the benches, the green benches in Parliament, but the whip. If they withdraw the whip, that just means that the chief whip doesn't go around telling them how to vote. Do you think? Do you suppose that someone as old and an old stager like McDonnell, a relic of the Corbyn era, is he bothered by losing the whip? Do you think?
Well, they were doing it in full knowledge that this would happen. They'd been warned that it was definitely a Labour priority, but it wouldn't be right now. Claire, do you think those MPs are feeling sort of proud of what they've done?
I think you're absolutely right. They knew this was coming down the track. They knew exactly what they were doing. You only have to look down the list of the 7 to see that they're kind of the usual suspects, right? They're the Corbynists who no doubt Starmer, well, you could say perhaps he was looking for an excuse to withdraw the whip from them. But I do think there's a kind of fine line between ruthless and reckless. We saw this sort of ruthless side of him during the campaign as well, didn't we? When he was sort of purging half the hard left candidates then as well. And obviously Diane Abbott was the one that sort of came back to bite him and caused him a lot of negative headlines. But his kind of intention to deal with these rebels has sort of been clear for the last few weeks. But I do think you're right. The issue on which he's done it is quite a tricky one. And, he did indicate on earlier this week on Monday, I think, that he might actually be up for scrapping this cap. But the fact that he's now done this, I don't know, one wonders whether it makes the path back to doing that even harder.
Yeah, and Claire, you wonder, I mean, had 30 or 40 Labour MPs, and we know a lot of Labour MPs, and you've hinted at it there, don't like this policy, but had 30 or 40 of them banded together and done this, that would have been more difficult for Starmer to then say, right, okay, I'll suspend the lot of you.
Yes, it definitely would. And you're absolutely right. There's widespread support across the party for doing this. And some, it might have been quite a good sort of first flag to put in the sand, in terms of marking out his intention going forward. But, here we are, he's chosen to take the whip away from these MPs instead. I just wonder whether it's, I don't know. I mean, it sends a clear message, doesn't it, to the sort of junior and the new MPs that they won't, that sort of rebellion won't be tolerated. So perhaps he's avoiding a future situation in which 30 or 40 MPs will rebel against him on anything.
Tom says the real consequence of losing the whip is that they can't stand as Labour MPs at the next election, so will potentially lose their jobs. But this is only going to last 6 months, and there's a very strong argument they'll be back in the fold then, particularly if, as Claire says, Starmer starts to wobble on this. Giles, I don't want to use the phrase right-wing Starmer fanboy to describe you. It's not entirely fair, of course, but you are willing to give him a fair crack of the whip. What do you make of his performance first couple of weeks in?
It's annoying that you should use that phrase now, because actually I've nearly finished my memoir, which is actually called Right Wing Starmer Fanboy. That's really that's the summation of everything that I am. Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, leaving aside my uncertainty about what sort of punishment it is, I guess he has a limited range of punishments at his disposal. He could line them all up and sort of thwack their knuckles with a ruler, and that would be fun. Phrased as Claire does, what if, or was talking about what if 30 or 40 of them rebelled. I guess that's why he has to do that, to show that the 40 that they can't, and also he has to lay down the law early on that although I don't need you all to vote for my stuff to get through because of my huge majority, I expect you to, and there may be more significant things than this. I think probably the whole House would probably like to be able to give the benefit back. Osborne took it away as a sort of beginning of austerity. It wasn't really... and very, very slightly because of the old Tory bogeyman, the imaginary sort of feckless family on a housing estate who keep having more children just to get the 25 quid a week to spend on fags, which I don't think is the kind of person that we imagine anymore. We're sort of out of that level of...
and yet, though, Giles, if you look at polling, 60% of people think the cap is a good idea. And I wonder if that the legacy is not quite as you phrase it, as you say, but this notion that children are expensive, and actually, if you're going to have more than 2 children, you should make sure you have the wherewithal to pay for them. I think quite a lot of people intellectually agree with that. Certainly, that's the response we've had on this programme, I think.
I certainly do think that, but it's £25.60 a week, so it's very hard to imagine that the idea that the decision to have more children, because of course you have to remember we do need more children. We have got this declining, but the whole of Northern Europe has this. Well, the whole of Europe, most of the West has this declining birth rate. So in fact, we do need them. And for years, France used to incentivize people, and they used to specifically in the sort of central agrarian belt, they used to pay them to have children. And we might get to a stage where we have to do that. We might end with a situation where with the population decline, particularly if they continue to clamp down on immigration, we may end up with a situation where we don't have enough people, and they're saying, where can we find the money to pay people to have more children? Maybe a question that they're asking themselves in the future.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, that's clearly not the one they're having right now. I wonder, we've had a message in, Claire, from Chris, who says, Starmer is aware only 36% of the country voted for Labour. Recent polling suggests 60% of the public, we've been talking about that, are against lifting the 2-child cap. He could find the funding, but he needs to keep the country on side more. Do you actually think, Claire, that Starmer wants to change this?
That's a good question. I think he does want to change it. Well, I think he does want to change it. I mean, you're right. There's a lot of people who don't wish to, but he laid out his intentions in the manifesto. These MPs who have rebelled against the vote knew exactly what they were standing for, and the country voted for it, and he's in government with, let's face it, enough MPs that he can afford to remove the whip from 1 or 2. So, nobody can sort of turn around and act surprised about this now. And he's got a child poverty task force working on this. So I think, the intention is to do it. I just think he maybe has made it harder for himself.
Do you know, funny enough, at the point when George Osborne introduced the cap, I believe that the child benefit was still not means tested, because it was a universal for everybody, regardless of income, as long as it was picked up by the mother, until 2011. And I remember that because I had a child in 2011, and I'd left it a little bit late. I didn't have a child till I was 41, and if I'd had it 10 years earlier like everybody else, I could have got this free money for my children regardless of my income. And it was taken away. And I probably quite rightly, my mum, who was a consultant anaesthetist and a wealthy woman, she used to talk. I remember going with her to get the child benefit. She didn't bother to get it weekly because it was too little to be worth driving down there. So she'd go down to the post office and go every month and collect it. And it was about £3 a week per kid in those days. And it was about 25 quid for the month. And it was exactly enough. She would collect it from the post office and then go next door and buy the month's cigarettes with that money. And it was specifically hypothecated in her mind. And I used to say, even when I was 10, is this fair that you get this money? And she would say, well, I pay my taxes. There's no reason why I shouldn't get it back like everybody else. And this is special money because it has to be only the woman's allowed to get it, because if the man goes and picks it up, he'll only spend it on booze. And I thought of my dad. But would he really? Would Daddy really go and spend it all on booze? So I always saw it as my mum's fag money, and they only took it away when I had a child, which I think was probably completely right.
Yeah, that's a totally insane story. Unbelievable, Giles.